With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Tod Kelly.
Welcome back to Tod Kelly, one of our favorites. Haven't talked to him this year because he was our New Year's guest on our Blowout Spectacular, where he was the whole episode because he's just that important. Tod Kelly, long-form journalist, writer, producer of a great show out in the Portland area that is now up and running. You need to go find it, 7 Deadly Sins, and Ordinary Times OG in good standing. Sir, how are you today?
I'm excellent, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm thrilled to talk to you. First thing I just want to ask you, because I always appreciate your big picture perspective on things. You've been a writer, you're a journalist. I kind of tell people you're an observer of humanity at this kind of stage of your game. And I mean that as a compliment.
No, that works. Yeah.
The events of the last few days, and everybody's talking about, this changes the world order and this is a momentous moment in history and this will set up the next generation. I think all of that's true to various degrees, but we don't know what degree. How has it hit you? Because, we have a war of aggression. We have a massive shooting war. We have armies in the hundreds of thousands moving. This is stuff most of us have not seen in our lifetime. How has these events kind of hit you?
At the risk of saying something I shouldn't, I am not a foreign policy expert. Like, I know almost nothing. And so if I'm being honest, most of how it hits me is what I'm seeing domestically. In terms of what is going to happen internationally, I will tell you, I have no idea. And I feel confident that nobody else really does either. And so I think what I have been more interested in watching is how it's all gone down here in the United States. I think for the first time since maybe like 2016, I am having that feeling of domestically, well, I do not know what is going to happen next. I certainly did not predict the GOP and at least most conservatives turning on a dime on Russia and Putin and really Trump, at least with this one thing. And I didn't foresee it. It surprised me. I don't know if it will last, but as I say, for the first time in 2016, I don't know what's next for us domestically, and I can't even hazard a guess.
Is it interesting that I think this is a good litmus test, though, of we have something so serious that it's just burning through a lot of the nonsense, and you're finding out really, really quick the people who can dial it down when they want to. You're finding the people who, I know the term's overused, but the people that it's just a business model or it's just the grifting, and I know we overuse that, but it's still a good term. And maybe some of them just assumed, we were talking online, some of them just assumed, well, everybody else in the world's grifting because I'm grifting. And that's all of a sudden him like, oh no, these bad people are serious about this stuff.
Yeah.
I think some of this is actually starting to burn through, and some folks that have kind of been on the wrong side of things, maybe this is a moment of clarity of like, okay, at least on this one thing, maybe I need to take a step back and reevaluate a little bit.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? I think those of us who are online, like, I think we've seen a bunch of this where when things were first happening in Ukraine and everybody started being surprised by how well they were holding up, you still saw people who were trying to find a way to work pronouns into that narrative, who looked, obviously ridiculous. And I think there are two ways that this could possibly go. And one is what you're saying, that people are sort of being reminded of what their deep values are, what their core principles are, and they're getting back to them. And with any luck at all, they'll stay there. And we'll go back to having sort of that, we disagree, but everybody's sort of grounded in principle. I think the other possibility, which I think is just as likely, unfortunately, is that it's more a reflection of a complete lack of foundational principles, that everybody switched sides on the Ukraine super fast as the wind was blowing, and then potentially they'll drift back to where they were as soon as this is over. Like maybe what I hope it's not like, to give like the best analogy I can give is I hope it doesn't end up being like January 6th of 2021, where you remember there was that period of about a month where everybody on both sides sort of, this is bad, this is wrong, this is not who we are. But that didn't last. And I'm hoping that this with the Ukraine lasts. I don't remember seeing this much positive energy about democracy and the forces of good and standing up to evil as I've seen this week in I don't know how many years.
Is that
I hate to like, and
yeah.
and I don't even know that it's going to go well for the people in Ukraine over time. And so I feel bad saying that, like, I find something hopeful about this, but I do.
Yeah, I find it hopeful too, because it's an indictment on us. I was talking about it this way. This is part of the American privilege, is that we get to pick and choose our problems. But it really does, and it's an indictment to us, but it's just the truth. When we see evil, we do tend as a nation to rise to it historically. And there was a lot, we just spent a couple of years debating of, well, could we rise up to a World War II moment? Are we still that kind of a country? I'm going to be optimistic here. I think we have an answer to that, by far the vast majority of at least Americans and even the world and Europe, they've got an evil they're facing now. And almost all of them, and some of them, it took them a day or two, they're responding to it and recognize it. And I think this is a big positive to a question that we in the commentariat have been kicking around for a couple of years. Yes, the answer is yes, we can stand up to an evil.
Yeah. And like I say, it may not last, but for the moment, I think that I just want to live. I just want to live in this moment where it feels like everybody, except for one country, is kind of standing up and doing the right thing, or at least, not standing up and doing the wrong thing. It is greatly heartening to me.
Talking to Tod Kelly, I almost said our Tod Kelly because that's his Twitter handle, but you need to be following him because he has great wisdom for all of us. Something in your largesse as a longtime journalist, though, I think this also cut into how we consume media in America, because all of a sudden the commentary and the panel shows just don't seem quite as important. And I know, look, I'm already one of those people. I get a lot of overseas news anyway because I just can't stand network news in America. I've talked to a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people that I don't have contact with. They're all saying the same thing, is like, hey, where do I get a good news feed? Where do I get good information? This has definitely been a technology event. It's been a world event because it's being live streamed from the people involved in it. Is this going to be a clarifying moment in American media where we start going, okay, the old method of covering these live events is different because everybody's a journalist now and everybody can go get their media? Do you think the national media and the network media has a moment of, wow, we're kind of getting bypassed on one of the biggest stories in decades?
No, I wish, I wish that were the case, but I think we're going to continue to see the same pattern that we have, where the vast majority of what refers to itself as the news media is in fact simply an entertainment vehicle that's designed to make money. And a very small subset of the news media is actually journalists and investigative journalists doing day-to-day leg and grunt work. And I don't see anything that's going to change that because, basically because that's the way that capitalism works. And that it is very expensive comparatively to go out and produce real journalism, and it doesn't sell as well as the cheap stuff, where you have a couple of talking heads on and yell at one another. Like, that costs nothing to produce other than, the salary of your host. And so I think that is going to be the dominant news media for a very long time.
Yeah, we joke about it, but you have the opening segment, and then you have the guests to talk about the opening segment, and then you have the panel discussion to talk about the guests talking about the opening segment. There's your first 30 minutes of every news program right there.
Yeah, and I think what we don't like, I don't think this gets pointed out as much. I know that I think we've talked about this before, but most of the people who are on the panel are there to sort of draw eyeballs. Almost nobody is an expert on what they've all gathered to talk about. Almost nobody has any kind of special insight. But that's not, but people don't, it's not something I think that people come to with the expectation that they are going to get a deeper understanding. I think that they come either to be entertained or to have a particular idea that they would like to have actively reinforced.
Yeah, it turns into a funnel really quick. It was one thing we've tried to do, and not just our little program, we do it at Ordinary Times too. It's like, what a concept. If you have a science question, go ask the science expert. If you got a cybersecurity question, and the panels, and I'm not knocking them, I'm just picking them, but the network news programs, like a CNN, it's the same 7 or 8 people on every panel for every subject, no matter what it is. Yeah. And all due respect to them, I'm sure they're fine people with fine insights. But when you have the same, how this works, you produce shows. When you have the same 8 people in the same green room over and over and over again, there's going to start being some, there's going to start being some groupthink in there somewhere, just because human nature is undefeated, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's that classic moment from a few years ago where Anderson Cooper, who I genuinely like he seems a really likable guy, but there was that moment where, and you probably remember this, where he was interviewing Jeffrey Lord about something, who is a regular guest and a friend of Donald Trump's. And at one point, Cooper sort of breaks down and says, well, of course you're saying that, you're just a shill. You just repeat whatever Trump says. And the question that I couldn't understand why he was not asking himself was like, well, why do you have him on every other day? Like, if he has nothing to contribute, why is he a regular guest of yours?
I know, because pro wrestling, you got to have a heel to have a good guy. You got to have a bad guy to argue with. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're talking to Tod Kelly, a good friend of ours. We get him every so often. Love having him on the program. We're going to continue to talk to him more. A little culture, a little media, talking about Ukraine and the greater effects domestically, as he calls it, here on America. More with Tod Kelly right after this on Heard Tell. Welcome back to Heard Tell, talking to our buddy Tod Kelly, getting a little bit wider perspective on stuff. All right, I have my own opinion on the State of the Union. I think these are just kind of dog and pony show things. Have we kind of kept some traditions in our politics that just don't fit anymore? I know you get it's going to get a 20 rating or whatever on TV. Are there certain traditions like this that have just kind of outlasted their prime, and we just kind of keep doing them out of habit and never stop to go, what are we actually accomplishing here?
Yeah. And you will know this more than I do because you have you have the legal background, but is the State of the Union, that's constitutionally required, is it not?
Yes, and it was a report until I forget which president started it, but yeah, you could write a letter and do this, and you'd be good.
Yeah,
it's just a report to Congress from the executive.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the point of it, or at least I don't understand the point of it except with certain presidents. I think that there are certain presidents who are particularly good orators, who have very specific messages that they want to get out, not to Congress, but to the American people. And they're good at it. I thought Reagan was good at it. I thought Obama was good at it. I thought the elder Bush was really good at it when they needed to. But then but does it need to be the State of the Union for them to do that? I don't know that it does. And I have to be honest with you. I don't think I've watched the State of the Union address in close to 10 years.
Yeah, and I teed it up to get to this question for you, though, is I think the thing that's changed the most about the State of the Union is we see the president every day. We see
Right.
the president at the top of every news hour. The nationalization of the media, which is something you can speak to because you've watched it happen and you've talked about it at length and you've wrote about it a lot over the years. The nationalization of the media is always going to gravitate towards presidential politics because that's the national symbol for everybody. That's the one thing everybody's
Right.
got the same president, right? We all have
Right.
different congressmen and senators. We all got one president. I think the media environment and the social media environment, we have the president in front of us 24/7 now. I think it's just kind of changed how we see the State of the Union. So now the pageantry of it and the pomp and the circumstance and the sit down, stand up, fight, choreographed clapping for the laugh lines and all that sort of, I think it just lands really weird for an American people who sees the president all the time now.
Yeah, and I think that it creates I think it further creates a sense of cynicism among sort of the voters because I mean, we all know it doesn't matter how good or bad everything is going at the moment. We all know that whoever's president is going to get up and say everything is fantastic. And again, we don't like things could be going fantastic. And we know that immediately the other side is just going to start explaining how terrible everything is. That it doesn't seem like nothing about the State of the Union seems genuine or honest, except, as I said, in those moments where I think somebody is really has a very specific message that they are trying to get out and use that. I think it is largely not taken seriously by voters. And that's not good.
No, it's not good. And cynicism is bad.
Yeah.
But cynicism is a two-way street. It's the government's fault and it's partially our fault too. Talking to Tod Kelly about these things. All right, it's an election year. I wonder though. We talk about how partisan everything is, how divided everything is. We know cyclically what should happen this year. You know, the Democrats are probably in for a rough year just historically. That's just kind of how these things go. But I really wonder, how much do you think our elections are really a reflection of our people right now, and how much of them are just turning into cyclical things? And I know that's a little bit of a deeper question, but we get into this nonsense about every election being, you know, I'm on my 9th most valuable election of my lifetime. I think I don't know what one you're on because I don't want to call you older. But we just
very much older. Yeah.
Yeah. But we just keep talking about this over and over again. And it's like, there's so much gridlock right now. A lot of this is just kind of habits and cycles and stuff like that, more so than actual trends. And then we try to read trends into them. Does it feel like that to you sometimes?
Yeah. And I think I would go a step further than what you're saying. I don't even see it as gridlock anymore. I think that I sort of now view people who run for office as doing it mostly for reasons of celebrity. Like if you were to make a list of the top, I don't know, the top 20 legislators that you could name off of your head because you see them on the news and everything, like constantly, and there are people are always talking about, I would ask you to go back and see how many pieces of legislation, any of them serious legislation, not even passed, how many have they introduced over the past 10 years? If you like weed out symbolic stuff that they're like, how much actual governance is being done? And I don't know that there's a lot.
No, and we know that because if legislation goes anywhere, or let me rephrase that, meaningful legislation, it's in an omnibus bill with a whole bunch of other stuff. It's slid into a financial crunch where they just have to pass it. They'll stick it in the back of the DOD funding, something that has to be passed. So you can scream that you don't love America if you don't vote for this post office over yonder somewhere, that sort of thing.
Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene is like a great example. I mean, she's been stripped of committees. She has no legislative power whatsoever. And yet you can't deny that because of the way everything's set up now, she really is one of the most powerful voices in Congress right now.
Yeah, you bring her
certainly
up.
Far more powerful than people who like go to work every day and write bills and try to get compromise who you never hear about.
Is media power now? We used to joke about Twitter ain't real life. But, we looked at what used to be power in Congress, where you had an LBJ who would literally just stand and lean over people until they did their legislation the way he wanted them to.
Right.
And I've always told people, you think Trump was profane, you should read up on LBJ sometime. Trump's a piker in comparison.
Yeah.
But that used to be the power, like the back rooms, the smoke-filled rooms, cutting deals.
Mhm.
Is the power now really the social media influencers that just happen to hold office on top of it? Is that really power now?
I think it is a hard question for me to answer, because I think the question that I keep coming with when I try to answer that is, what is power? The GOP, from one point of view, somewhere along the way after 2012, seemed to amass a huge amount of power nationally, in terms of being elected to office. But how much of what the GOP traditionally ran on and they wanted to do, and laws they wanted to pass, did they ever get done? I'm having a hard time thinking of any. And so if you're winning elections, do you have power if you're not taking the time to do anything with it? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, none of the rest of the nation does either, including me.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we need to wrestle with. You brought it up, so I'm going to go there on Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Okay.
We know what she did. CPAC was in Florida. That means Fuentes and his knuckle dragging morons had their hate fest in conjunction with CPAC, because they follow around all the big conferences and have an adjacent. We know she attended. She took multiple pictures with them all together. Representative Gossard out in Arizona has also spoken to this group. This is a straight up hate group. They're Holocaust deniers. I hate using this term because I think we overuse it in the broad spectrum of prejudices, which is ignorance and fixable, and this is an evil, wicked thing. But they are racist. They're not really hiding it.
Yeah.
What do we do here? Because I get annoyed. I put it out on Twitter. I'm like, she needs to be expelled from Congress. Congress has a mechanism, 2/3 vote, and they're expelled. That's a very high bar.
Right.
And I just get person after person after person like, no, that supports the will of the voters. I'm like, you don't want the precedent. They could throw you out for saying something. I'm like, no, it's 2/3, man. Do you know what it takes to get 2/3? You can't get 2/3 on the naming of a post office nowadays.
Right.
I'm just shocked. I guess I shouldn't be as hard and as cynical as I get accused of being. There's validity to the accusation. How in the world is this person in Congress? How is Gossard, who may literally be losing his mind if you go listen to some of the clips of what he's saying? How are these people in power and Congress hasn't ejected them? I know the answer is partisan politics. Is it the wider country just doesn't really realize who these people are? What is it? Because it just befuddles me that these unworthy people hold office.
So yeah, one of two different possibilities. And one possibility is that people simply aren't paying attention, and they don't know who these are, and they're not really interested in learning. I think the other possibility that I don't think that we should dismiss out of hand is that voters know exactly who Marjorie Taylor Greene and these people are, and vote for her because of that.
Is it the thing where it's they get to say the things out loud we don't want to say? Because I think there's quite a bit of that on social media. I know a lot of people like to couch terms, especially when it comes to racial stuff, comes to anti-Semitic stuff. Is there just an element of that where they may not even be completely true believers in the hatred part of it? They just like people who get to say things they're forbidden from saying.
I think that there's some of that. I don't think you should ever discount on any side of the political fence the power of attempting to build coalitions against a capital O other. And sometimes that other are immigrants or globalists or who knows, or people who put pronouns on their Twitter bios. Let's put it this way. Back when I used to write for Ordinary Times, one of the things that I used to write about a lot was people in the GOP needed to stop saying certain things. because if they didn't, their voters were going to vote them out of office. And I firmly believe that. But what I have seen over the past 10 years since then is that the more things like that certain politicians say, the more votes that they get. And there are places I don't want to go with that knowledge because I don't want to reach the conclusions that I might get, but I can't deny that I've seen that.
Yeah. And human nature is undefeated. And I think one of the big problems we have culturally is we just don't want to talk about human nature first and then try to solve problems second.
Right.
But that's a deeper conversation for another day. Tod Kelly, I always appreciate your insights, sir. You've been a wonderful friend and mentor to me, and I appreciate you greatly. And I will thank you publicly every chance I get. Let folks know where your social media is so they can get more of your great wisdom and your occasional writing at ordinary-times.com, which we always clear the deck for you.
You can follow me on Twitter at @rtodkelly, and that is where I'll always announce new pieces dropping. So,
and check out his shows if you're ever up in the Portland area.
Yeah.
They're back up and running. 7 Deadly Sins, easy to find. They got a couple different. Tell folks real quick what it is, because you've actually got a couple varieties of them now, don't you?
Yeah, we have most of them are based on personal narrative. So we have a main stage show where we have people tell stories that have happened to them in their real life, and they're fascinating. We've had the story of the woman whose village was bombed when she was growing up in Iran and later was set up on a blind date with an older man who she figured out during the date was one of the people who'd bombed the village. A wonderful gentleman whose daughter had been killed at Sandy Hook and went through a period of time where he couldn't see color, and sort of an act of kindness one day sort of brought his sight back. So really compelling stuff, and we hire musicians to score music to it. But we have a lot of other different kinds. We have a Truths and a Lie show where 7 people tell like the most outrageous thing they've ever done, like a bar story, and one of them's line, and if whoever in the audience can guess who it is wins a prize. Good stuff.
Yeah, good human
people seem
stuff.
to like it.
And good human entertainment, which we need more of. That culture thing, not the war stuff we talk about online. The actual culture thing is in, people understanding each other. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Tod Kelly, appreciate your time, sir. Really appreciate you. Always good talking.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Always a pleasure to be here.
We'll have you back soon, sir. Thank you, Tom.